In this video, we're going to start to create our player. So we do already have some characters in this asset pack that we imported, but I found some other ones I think are going to work a bit better. So if we just go back to the Kenny site, we'll go up to Assets, 2D, and if we just browse through, I found Toon Characters 1. So we're going to use this one. So I'm just going to download it here. I'll extract it. And I'm just going to drag this folder into our sprites. Okay, so now that that's here, you can actually pick and use whatever character you want. So I'm just going to look through here. And I think I'll just go with the female adventurer that's up here. And now to show, we have a few different options here. So we do have a tile sheet, or other times you'll hear it called a sprite sheet. So I'm not going to show that method yet because for this art, that would be a bit complicated to get into this early. So we'll talk about that later, but to give a quick summary, just so you know if you see any, if you see a sheet like this is usually called a sprite sheet or sometimes a sprite atlas. And what this is instead of one single image, it's one image file with a whole bunch of animations in it. So you can see all these different little frames are different things that our player is doing. So there's climbing, there's jumping, and then we have to tell Unity how to use each of these. So we are going to cover that later. So just so you know a bit of what we're looking at there. But we have another option here too. So if we look under the PNG folder, we have the HD one. So we're going to use the HD. It's just a bit higher resolution. But we have two different things here. We have parts and then poses. So what parts is, this is if you want to actually do what's called keyframing animation. So this is kind of the equivalent of, it's almost like stop animation. Basically, you piece your objects together and then you hit a record button and you start moving everything. And you actually do all the movements and record the animation yourself. So you can make the body move, you can make the face move. In one way, you have a lot more freedom because you can move the parts how you want. But at another time, you are limited because you can only resize or rotate and move the objects that you have here. So that's something else we'll talk about later. But what we want is the poses folder. So we're going to use poses HD. And if you look here, each of these is just a single image. And they're all named what they're doing. So if you look here, we can see this is character, female adventurer, attack 0. And then attack 1. So those are different frames of an animation. And we have a kick. We have cheer. And now in this window here, we can resize this one a bit just so you can see them better. But you notice it doesn't show the titles. What we can do though is we can rescale this with this little slider at the bottom. So you can make the icons bigger, or you can go completely small where you only see the text and then you'll see the names of them. So we can look down and look. What we want is idle. So idle is just going to be a pose where the player is just standing there doing nothing. They're just idle. So this is what we want. I'm going to resize this a bit bigger again. And now if we look here, this is a normal sprite just like we had before. So if needed, you can change the pixels per unit and you can change the size, but I'm not going to bother on that. I'm actually going to do it a different way. So I'm going to drag this idle pose in. And now notice we don't see our player, and that's because of the layer again. So we're on default layer. Okay, so we need to create a new layer again. So let's go to add sorting layers. And for our next empty one, layer 3, if you don't see it here, you just have to hit a plus sign and this will make extra layers. Okay, we just want to call it player. Now let's go back to our player and let's assign it to that layer. And now remember, if this does show up black for you, go back to Global Light 2D and just make sure it's selected here. So yours might not be like mine is already because I did have that player layer already. So just add that and then we should be good there. Now I'm going to rename this to just be player. I'm going to move it up on the platform and our player looks a little too big. So I'm going to hit R on the keyboard, which remember earlier I said is the scale tool, which is this one right here. And now I'm just going to resize it by clicking right in the middle so it rescales all. And I'm just going to eyeball what looks good to me here. So I think somewhere about here. So it's a bit of a random number. I'm just going to change it. We'll get a whole one, so I'll do 0.74. And I'll set that for all of them. So if you want to follow what I have, you're welcome to, but you can also make this your own game and make this player whatever size you think fits. Okay, so now that I have that in here, I'm going to show you it in a second, but what I'd recommend doing is before I do it, go and see if you can figure out how to give this player physics and cause collisions on it without me having to show you first. So what you want to do is you're going to want to make this a prefab. You're going to want to make the player affected by physics so it falls down when it's in the sky so we can put it up here. And then you also want to make it collide with this platform. So give that a try. If you have any problems, just follow along with what I do right now, but practicing that on your own first is the best way to learn and remember how to do this. So let's give this a shot here. Okay, so the first thing I want to do is I'm going to add a rigid body. And remember, we need rigid body 2D. So now if I run the game, the player is going to fall, but it doesn't collide with anything. And as the word is, we need a collider. So I'm going to type collider. And for our boulder, we used a circle collider. For this one, I'm actually going to use a capsule collider. So this is shaped more like a capsule. And we can kind of make this shape to our player. So it's a bit hard to see on the background. I'm just going to move it off to the side here. And now I'm going to click the Edit Collider button. So now I can just kind of move and drag this in. And now this one, I don't want to make the collider fit just on the outside of the player. Because what you'll probably notice if you've played a lot of old games, sometimes you're going to feel like you were cheated when you die at a point you don't think you touched something or you don't think you were close enough. And it always just feels like you were cheated when that happens. The hair of your player hit something or, just the little edge of your hand or your foot, something like that. So this all comes down to practice and play testing to find what feels right. But what I usually do is I try to ignore most of the hair of a player. And then for the actual collision, I try to make it more about the body. So this one, because the hands stick out so far, I'm going to go a little bit further. But I'm basically going to go like kind of where the head is and the ear begins. So then those are the parts where collisions actually matter. Anything outside of that is just going to pass through it. And this is something that you're going to change throughout your game as you play test. When you find things that don't work, we're going to go back and we modify them. Okay, so we have a collider. Let's press W again on the keyboard for the move tool up here. Or if you don't like keyboard shortcuts, you can just click these. Now I'm going to move it back over here. Let's hit play. Okay, and now we fall and we collide. And then if we wanted, we could take the rock. Let's add some force to it. And now we're going to be able to push the player. And now we notice something here too. We don't actually want our player to fall over. So if the player is hit, we want to display that to the user, but we don't want the actual player to rotate. So the way we can fix this, let's go to a player. We go to constraints under the rigid body. And we have freeze rotation and freeze position. So we don't want to freeze the position of our player at all. That'll stop it from moving on the X or the Y. We want to freeze the rotation, which is the Z. So if we check that, let's try this again now. You're going to see we can still push our player, but it'll always stay upright. There we go. Okay, and the last step we need to make, let's go to our prefabs folder, let's drag in our player, and now we have a prefab of the player. All right, so there's the start of our player. I'm just going to move it over to this platform, and I will see you in the next video.